Hi, my name is Stephen Kwiatek, and I'm a postdoctoral research associate.
Hi, I'm Nicole, Birri, and I'm a training specialist, and we're from the Illinois Center for Transition and Work.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Community Resource Mapping. Our agenda today consists of an overview of community resource mapping, steps for community resource mapping, and then we'll describe an example of using community resource mapping with a case study.
Community resource mapping has been used in different ways, but for the purpose of this webinar, we're going to define community resource mapping as a process that is used to identify and organize resources that are within the community that students will need to be successful while they're in school and after school. And why community resource mapping is important is because it's going to provide students with access to a much broader and more inclusive system of services. It's going to help identify career development activities and curriculum that's offered by the school and other community partners. And it's also going to build on what is already out there and available and help you develop a more results-driven system and ultimately improve adult outcomes for your students. And how community resource mapping can help is that it provides support and information for the entire transition process. And it's going to provide support in identifying work-based learning sites. It's going to provide opportunities for collaboration and networking outside of families and agencies. And it's going to assist in locating various services within the community. It's also going to assist in identifying needs of the community. And then also it's going to be a tool that can be used in the planning process. And community resource mapping, it can include an array of things, but most times community resource mapping includes community resources, services for individuals with disabilities, employment resources, any kind of post-secondary vocational training, independent living, and then transportation information. And there's two types of community mapping. It can be done two ways. The first way is concrete mapping, and that is your physical tour. You're out there on the street, you're walking around, you're collecting pictures and artifacts and going into businesses and talking to people. And then the other way to do that is abstract mapping, which is the more convenient and modern way to do it. And that's getting on the internet, looking up your community, looking for things that are in your area, gathering information regarding those community assets and resources.
So the steps to the community mapping process, you have to begin with preparing to map. After your preparation, you will then identify community resources. Then you'll connect with those resources. And then finally, you'll match community resources to individual students to meet their specific transition-related needs. So it's important to take time and prepare to map. And so it's really important to think about what is the purpose of mapping? Because when you're community mapping, there are a wide variety of resources that you can include. So by being very focused and considering the purpose of your mapping, you'll be able to make sure you're thinking about the types of resources that are going to benefit your students. So for example, you may consider employment for students with significant disabilities. And now that you have your purpose decided, make sure to take a moment and consider how technology can help. So there are different resources that are out there that are available for use. For example, Google My Maps can be used as to find a list of potential community resources near you. Google My Maps is free. You just need a Google account. But what's nice is you put in the name of a town or a zip code or an address, and you can see all of the businesses and all of the supports that are available within that area. And so it's a nice way to have a list to start from, as opposed to maybe needing to go door to door to identify all of the businesses or supports available within your community. You can also think about how you're going to organize your information. You can use Google My Maps to store conversations or data or notes that you've had related to communication with a specific community partner. You can also use Excel to create yourself a document and help organize your list by the different types of community resources that are available. And then you can organize those in tabs by your specific mapping purposes. while you're preparing, it's also important to consider, are there other people who can help you with community mapping? Community mapping takes time, and there's a lot to it. And so thinking about others helping you will make the process a little bit simpler. So are there teacher colleagues? Do you have partners that you work with in the community? For example, transition planning committees. Those TPCs sometimes already have a start to a list of available resources within your community. And so that might be a way to partner with someone to have supports in place so you're not starting from scratch. Community mapping can be done independently, but best practice suggests working with others. So now that you've done the preparation, that kind of upfront work, now it's time to actually begin identifying community resources. And so community resources can be anything used to improve community quality of life. And so that can include people, physical structures or places, community services, or businesses. And so I think it's important when you're identifying community resources to be sure that you start with connections that you already have. For example, I was a high school teacher in Illinois, and when I worked with DRS, I knew about some of the services that they offered, but I didn't know about the other supports that were available. And so I spoke with my DRS rep to get a better idea of all the services that are available through DRS. So I had a better grasp on what supports were available to help my students and families prepare for life after high school. Once you consider the connections you already have, consider and think about different connections that would be helpful. So you can think about citizen associations. So are there community centers? Are there local officials? Think about institutions. That could be places like a community college. That could be libraries. That could be your local parks and rec center. It could be community organizations, thinking about housing, or churches or religious organizations. Churches, for example, have been documented to have supports like soup kitchens and places where students could develop skills that are only used one day during the week. So there are 6 days of the week that these resources are available that could be used to provide community-based instruction and to partner with community organizations to teach students outside of the classroom. Can also consider private sector, right? Our local businesses, and think about how we can partner to provide different work and employment related experiences. Then also consider community populations. That could be college students or volunteers. Nicole and I had delivered this training previously in person, and we had one region who shared with us that they partnered with a local college to have college mentors to partner with students. So the college mentors got to learn how to mentor others, and then the high school students got extra support from someone who has recently transitioned from high school into college settings. And so being creative with those community populations and make sure you consider them is really important. So now that you've identified these resources, now you have to connect with them. We have to make sure that we go from having a list to knowing who these people are. And so we want to connect with organizations. And so to do that, you'll develop lines of communication. You'll learn about specific resources that they offer. And then it's important as you're collecting this information to think about how you're going to organize and examine your information, right? As we discussed up front with the preparation step. On the next slide, we're going to share with you an example of how you could consider organizing this information. So here is an example of the types of questions or conversations you could be having to make sure you fully understand the type of supports that community organizations and partners may provide. So you could ask about their purpose. Is there any sort of funding sources? What kind of service delivery is there? Are they specific to a certain population? Are they specific for students with intellectual disability or autism? What sorts of activities or services do they provide? Do they partner with other agencies? What expected outcomes do you think could happen from this collaboration? And then any other notes you have. This is not meant to be an all-inclusive list of things to discuss, but it just gives you an idea of how to start the conversation to make sure you can fully understand all of the available opportunities by partnering with your community resources. So when you're connecting with your resources, you're going to have to analyze the information that you get. And so you may notice that there are overlaps or there may be gaps and implications. And so you may notice there's something missing from your community that students might find beneficial. For me, as a work program coordinator, we had two options for who we could partner with for job coaching supports. And so there was some overlapping services there that we needed to consider. Once you look at these overlaps, gaps, and implications, then you can formulate an action plan to work with community partners and to maximize these community resources to identify opportunities to support students and families as they prepare for life after high school. And then this is just another example of a way you could document information for consideration. You'll notice it just has overlapping information, gapping information, if there are any implications from the information.
And here is an example of a resource directory that Champaign County TPC came up with. And if you'll notice on the left-hand side, you'll see 9 categories: hotline numbers, financial assistance, recreation and leisure, transportation, educational services, residential services, vocational services, healthcare, support services. And what Champaign County did here is that they organized all the resources that they found into these categories. And if you look on the left side, you'll see the picture of the educational service up in the right-hand corner. And this is where they have each one of the educational services that are in Champaign County. And you'll notice that they have the address, the contact information, and then a short description of the service. And so this is a resource that Champaign County hands out to families. They receive these at the IEP meetings. And it's a resource that families can take with them when the student does transition. So here is just one example of how a resource map has been organized and put together. And so now we're going to talk about how to match community resources to individual students. So now that you've done all of the mapping portion of it, now it's time to match everything that you found to your individual students and begin the transition planning process. And similar to the resource mapping process, there's going to be 3 steps. So you're going to do some pre-matching, then you'll do matching, and then some post-matching. And for pre-matching, the first thing you're going to want to do is review the IEP goals. You're going to look through the IEP and you're going to look at and identify what the strengths and areas of growth are. You're going to look at identifying the interest and preference of the student. You're going to look at identifying the present levels of performance in all transition areas. So that's education and training, employment, and then independent living if that applies. And then when you go to match the resources, you're going to identify the relevant agencies and resources to that student. And you're going to use the IEP transition goals to find those educational training programs that are going to help meet the student's goals. And you're going to find potential employment sites that are going to match the student's interest preference. And you're also going to identify resources for preferred leisure activities and independent living options. And then finally, when you are finished doing all your matching, you're going to identify available supports to help obtain relevant services while the student is in, and then while they're after they have completed high school. And then you're going to utilize resources when developing the transition plan and your instruction. And then last, you want to provide the family with the resources, and this is going to help them to you want to help them to identify who to contact for those various services that you have found. So now we're going to take a look at a student and go through the process of actually matching the community resource map to your student. So for this case study, we have a student, Brandon. He's in 12th grade. He has autism and intellectual disability. He's eligible and does receive DRS services. He requires one-on-one support, small group instruction when learning new concepts. He benefits from repeated practice of newly learned skills. He maintains engagement while in the classroom, and he can transition to the next activity with little to no redirection. And at times he can become frustrated with those around him, and this can cause him to exhibit some verbal aggression, but he can de-escalate pretty quickly, and he shows no signs of physical aggression towards himself or others. So this is information you would see in the learner profile, right in the IEP. And so the first step now is to review the transition goals. So Brandon has 3 goals, one for each area. So upon completion of high school, Brandon will attend a job training program, community, vocational, or trade program, where he will study a career of his choosing while gaining more skills in the area of employability and independent living. So that is his education and training goal. And then his second goal, upon completion of high school, Brandon will gain competitive employment in the area of his choosing. So this is his employment goal. And then last, Brandon will follow social guidelines to share feelings with appropriate intonation patterns. So for Brandon, this is a social goal, but this is also an independent living goal, right? This is something that he's going to need to be able to do in both an employment setting and daily life. So these are his transition goals that we will be matching. And the next step is to look at the strengths and needs of Brandon. So some of Brandon's strengths are that he is really good at household management skills. He likes to clean and he knows how to use most household appliances. He knows the concept of money and he pays and simulates bills and writes simulated checks at school. He can use appropriate currency to pay for purchases and make change. And he's also able to budget his money and save for larger purchases. Some of Brandon's needs, though, are that he could benefit from learning to use public transportation. He hasn't really showed an interest in learning how to drive, and public transportation will be important to help him learn to travel independently to work and other recreational activities. And he could also learn to plan for weekly grocery shopping and learning to navigate the grocery store independently. So these are his strengths and needs. And now we want to look at what his interest and preferences are. And for Brandon, Brandon enjoys art. He likes to sing, reading, basketball, television. He likes to go to the library. He likes to go to the rec center to spend time with his friends. And he likes to shop at Walmart. Brandon's also very fascinated with household appliances and how they operate. He likes to take apart and repair different appliances. He's very much fascinated with a vacuum cleaner especially. And he's also expressed an interest in designing hair. Brandon also states that he would like to go to college to learn vacuum repair, cosmetology, also to learn to design hair, and he would like to take some art classes. And after college, Brandon said that he would like to work at a vacuum repair shop and design hair as a hobby. And Brandon is very clear about his expectations for the hours that he will work, the amount of money he should make, and the amount of time he should take off. And last, Brandon would like to continue to live with his aunt for a few more years after he graduates, before he starts to look for his own place. So this is information that came directly from all of those transition assessments that we give. Next, you want to look at the present levels of performance in the area of employability and independent living. So when we look at where Brandon is at home, Brandon, he's able to vacuum, wash dishes, do laundry, he can sweep and mop, do most household things independently. Brandon's able to wake himself up in the morning and prepare himself for the day, and he understands the concept of time and the importance of scheduling. Brandon also has proper hygiene. He follows directions, he can complete tasks, and he accepts criticism and can work independently with few prompts. So that's where Brandon's currently at. And so now it's time to start matching. And so when I go back and I look at the first goal, the education and training goal, upon completion of high school, Brandon will attend a job training program, community, vocational, or trade program where he will study a career of his choosing while gaining more skills. Okay, so when I go through and I'm thinking back to what his interest and preference are, and I'm thinking back to his present levels of performance and all of those things, I know that he's interested in going to vacuum repair school. So finding an appliance training school is that is in the area, I'm going to put that into my map. So for Brandon, I found the Cornerstone Appliance Training Center. And if you see here, I put the contact information. So that's one option for Brandon. Another option is he wants to go to cosmetology school. So finding a cosmetology school in the area is also something that I'm going to put down. So again, I have the contact information and the institution of where he could possibly go. And then when I go to look at his next goal, his employment goal, which is upon completion of high school, Brandon will gain competitive employment in an area of his choosing. Well, again, we know that he wants to be able to work at a vacuum repair shop eventually. And so to give him some employment experience, I'm going to find a vacuum repair shop, as I did here. And luckily, there's a nice vacuum repair shop here in downtown Champaign. So I'm going to put that down, and I'm going to put the contact information. There's several barbershops and salons in town. So I'm going to make a list of some of those as potential work sites for Brandon. And then in terms of independent living, for Brandon, his goal was more of a social goal. But when we think about these independent living goals, we want to include as much recreational experience as we can, because part of life is being able to enjoy your time off work. So having things to do with your time is always good. So we want to make sure that we find things that Brandon enjoys doing. And we know that Brandon likes to go to the library and likes to read. So of course, I'm going to find something in the community where he can do that. So Champaign has a nice public library, so I'm going to put that down. And then also he likes to go to the rec center to play sports with his friends. So I'm definitely going to look for some recreation centers that are a possibility that we can partner with and give him some time at these recreation centers. And then also Brandon expressed an interest in art. So finding some kind of arts and crafts that he can do in the community. There's the Pottery Place summer camp that is available. So that is a possibility. So you want to just go through and find things that are of interest and put those down. And then after you do all of the matching to each one of the goals, you're going to do this post matching. And what that is you're going to identify some supports and services that are available in your community. And Champaign has this nice community choices program, and it offers all kinds of supports and services. And so I'm going to put down that contact information and then a little description of the supports and services that are offered. And also because Brandon has autism, Champaign-Urbana has a nice autism network. And so I'm also going to put that down as a potential service for Brandon. And then you want to, after you do all of your matching, you want to share and then begin to utilize those resources. So you gather the relevant resources and you want to give those to the families. So when the student stops on their last day of school, they will have something to take with them. If they didn't make connections while they were in school, hopefully then at least they will have this resource to take with them. And then you want to include the following information within each of your resource. You want to give the parents a description of the resource. What is this? How is it going to help them? And also how and who they should contact. Should they call? Should they send an email, website? And so you want to provide them with as much information as possible to make it as easy for them as possible. And then you want to use the community resources that you've used for developing the transition plans and instruction. And so you want to include the relevant resources in that IEP transition plan. So once you identify those resources, name them in the transition plan. And then you want to utilize those resources within your instruction. So don't think about it as necessarily just finding places for students to go. This is also about finding ways to take the resources that you found in the community and use them within your instruction. And that could be, Stephen has a nice example of the YWCA that he's going to share.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nicole. I was working with students on appropriate interpersonal communication and relationships in multiple settings, including in the workplace, and how social norms are expected and how we address those. I didn't have a really strong skill set for delivering this instruction with the use of a specific evidence-supported curriculum, I ended up reaching out to the YWCA, and they had multiple curricula for teaching healthy interpersonal relationships across grade levels. And so they actually were willing to come in and teach my class about interpersonal relationships and healthy communication across settings, using the use or through the use of an evidence-supported curriculum that I didn't have access to. And so by connecting with my community, I was able to enrich the quality of instruction I was able to provide to meet the needs of my students.
Thank you, Stephen.
Welcome. And now we have just a couple of key takeaways from today's session when you're thinking of community resource mapping. First, community resource mapping organizes resources students will need while transitioning through and after school. It allows you to know what's available, and this is an ongoing process. So once you get your community map created, you will have to go through and update it regularly to make sure it's current. It allows you to identify career development activities and curricula. As I just shared with the YWCA, my students wouldn't have had access to that if I didn't reach out to the YWCA. I wouldn't have known about that. It also, community resource mapping, provides information needed for the transition process, assists in identifying work-based learning sites. So those community partners where you can, support students with competitive integrated employment or internships or skill development opportunities or work-based learning experiences. And so it allows you to know what's available within your community. And then it also assists in the transition planning process by engaging the community to make sure that students have a seamless transition from high school to adult life.